My name's Adel Najdowski, and thank you so much for meeting with me today. I'm going to be doing a webinar for you to provide a demo of the skills program, and I think we have an hour together. So I'll start by telling you what skills is exactly. It's an online tool that provides comprehensive assessment. It also provides curriculum and lesson plans. It has a section for writing behavior intervention plans for challenging behavior. The program also tracks progress during treatment, and it provides reports and analytics to its users. There are 4 steps to using the skills program. The first is just entering in the child's information. Then in step 2, you begin to answer questions of an assessment. Based on the results of how the questions are answered in step 2, the user will get a library of activities they can choose from in step 3. And basically everything in step 3 are things that are considered deficient in the child and things that need to be worked on. So you would pick up which of those you want to put into the child's treatment plan, which will then go into step 4, where you get access to lesson activity guides and other materials, and you begin monitoring progress. We do have one research study that's been published on the language subscale of the skills assessment. This was published in 2011. And in this study, they found that it had excellent test, retest, and inter-rater reliability. Excuse me. We are also currently running a validity study right now, and hopefully those results will be published in the near future. There are 8 areas to the skills assessment and curriculum. They include social, motor, language, adaptive or daily living, play, executive functions, cognition, and academic skills. And I usually take the time to go through 3 of these 8 areas. I don't have enough time to do all 8, but I will show you the executive functions, the cognition, and the social skills curricula because these are kind of the more exciting and unique areas to the skills program. I always like to show this slide. This is a credenza in my office, and it gives you an idea of what the curricula look like when they're all printed out. So each curriculum is in a binder here, and they're all 3 to 5 inch binders, of which there are 8. And then on top you see one blank binder. These are the worksheets, and I haven't printed all those out yet on my credenza, so there's even more than that. And those are just worksheets that go along with it. So this kind of gives you an idea of what exactly is involved in the skills program. It's an online system, so it's sometimes hard to be able to visualize tangibly what exactly it's providing. So let's look at the executive functions curriculum. There's various domains in this curriculum, including inhibition, flexibility, attention skills, memory, problem solving, metacognition, and planning. And I'm going to show you in a sec here the various lessons that are within each of these domains, but before I do that, I want to address the fact that we are using non-behavioral terminology here. Executive functions and memory and these kind of things are not considered behavior analytic at all. However, these are terms that are being used out in the general public and by other researchers and scientists and psychologists. There's been tons of publications out on these areas, and it's already a pretty decent literature that can be read. Basically, the studies show that children with autism have deficits in a lot of these areas, and they also have studies showing that typically developing children have these skills intact, and they do age studies actually to figure out at what ages the skills associated with all these develop and typical development. So we decided to stick with the same terminology because we are putting forth a curriculum that we're hoping people will also research. And we've done some research ourselves as well, and we're hoping to get ABA on the map a little bit for teaching some of these more complex, higher order skills that others would refer to as cognitive. So even though these names sound like this, the actual procedures and the way that the lessons are broken down is all completely behavior analytic. So let's start with looking at inhibition, and the lesson areas here include teaching things like waiting, or teaching children to inhibit both non-vocal and vocal behaviors of certain sorts. They also learn to be flexible in both non-social as well as social situations. In the attention domain, they are learning to orient to stimuli that they're not engaging with or noticing right now, but other children are, or to disengage from things that they're kind of overly perseverative on. They'll also learn to shift their attention from one stimulus or one task to another and back and forth, like they have to do a lot of times in a classroom setting. They do this when looking at a whiteboard and then taking notes, for example. There's also going to be emphasis on sustained attention, or learning to do tasks for longer and longer periods of time until it's age appropriate, and to use divided attention, or essentially to be able to engage in multitasking, and also to determine what in their environments are important and salient and should be attended to versus what are not and are okay to ignore. In the memory domain, the children are being taught to recall information across the various modalities that you see here. That's how the information is provided. And the delay between when it's provided and when the recall will be lengthened over time, as well as the chunks of information that they will be recalling will also be lengthened or widened. We here have published 3 studies in the last 2 years showing that children with autism can be taught various working memory tasks. So this is an example of where behavioral analysts can get involved with teaching some of these things and showing, look, ABA can do a lot more than teaching basic key skills. In the problem-solving area, a younger child would be working on simple problem-solving, so maybe just asking for help or to demand for help when they're in a problem situation. However, as they get older, the response requirement shifts. And that's one thing I should say in general about all of the curricula within the skills program, is that each of the lessons begins with emerging age skill. So if the lesson skill starts at the age of 2, then the lesson will begin there. But if that skill kind of changes and grows with the child in terms of expectations, then it won't end until it's at the full developed level. So for example, a 2-year-old can request for help when they have a problem, but it's not until 6 or older that a child actually recognizes there is a problem and can define it and then think of possible solutions and pick the best of those options, implement it, and then actually generate alternative solutions if for some reason that original solution doesn't work out. So that's where these lessons go to, is the final kind of more terminal skill. Oh, and let me back up too and say, also once they get to social problem solving, now they're also going to be using their perspective-taking skills, which is my whole next slide. We have a perspective-taking curriculum that's called the Cognition curriculum. So they're going to put themselves in the shoes of whoever they're in the problem or the conflict with when they're engaging in social problem solving. The metacognitive area teaches the children self-management and emotional self-control. They're also learning things like meta-memory here. So meta-memory is basically strategies that are taught to the children to help them to remember things. And these can be things for studying. So for example, teaching them to use flashcards or mnemonic devices and many others. Or it can be just simple things that we do in our daily lives to remember things. So for example, teaching them that you can write yourself a list or put a Post-it note out, or you could stick an object near a front door if you don't want to forget to take it with you the next day, and things like that. The planning area, again, it's going to start with youngest skills always. So like one of the earlier developing planning things would be something to do with maybe activity schedules, or even just teaching the child adaptive planning with respect to play planning. So if you want to play this, what do you need? And then helping them to figure out what materials are needed to engage fully and execute the plan. But as they get older, the planning requirements shift, obviously. So like a much more advanced version would be maybe somewhere in the academic planning, where they have to come up with long-term goals. So maybe they have projects due and break it down into shorter-term goals, figuring out deadlines for each, again, figuring out what materials are necessary, monitoring their progress. And when doing planning, a lot of times there's a lot of also using the other skill areas within the executive functions curriculum. So if they're trying to accomplish and execute a plan, they might need to attend to the correct things. They're going to need to be flexible if there's any obstacles that come into play and they have to shift their plan around a little bit. There's going to be maybe some problem solving going on. They have to remember things, and they also have to inhibit distractions. So all these things kind of play together in terms of executive functioning being goal-directed kind of behavior. The planning area also teaches them to organize materials. So this could be anything from learning how to organize their toys at home to how to pack a backpack appropriately for school, and how to keep their desk neat at school. This could also involve learning how to carry objects on their body appropriately. So a lot of times when they're being dropped off at school, they have a backpack and a lunch and a hat and many other things, and they're stumbling, and it's difficult for them to even get out of their parents' car quickly when the parents are in the line, the drop-off line. So those kind of things are also included in the planning section. The next slide I'm going to show you is the Cognition curriculum, or what behavior analysts would probably refer to as a private events curriculum. Again, we're just using the same terminology, though, that everyone else out there is using. There's been a big explosion of research in the theory of mind literature. So a lot of these topic areas of what we're teaching here are inspired by that literature. But again, everything in here is taught using behavior analysis. So the different areas that you see here are basically different people's private events. And in this curriculum, the children are taught to identify their own and others' private events. They are also taught strategies for doing that. So obviously one strategy is we can give them direct methods of finding out. They can ask somebody, what are you feeling, what are you thinking, what do you believe about this, or whatever. But we also want them to be able to make inferences, so that's a major goal here. So we'll teach them strategies to infer these things in others. And we also teach them to predict another person's private events in a future circumstance. So if this happens, how is your friend going to feel, or what will they think? Those kind of things. And then all of that is done so that the child can use that information in social application within social skills interactions. So I'm going to give you some examples of some of the areas in here and how they build on each other. Everything, again, starts with emerging age. So in the desires lesson, for example, some research has been done showing that 18-month-old typically developing children are already beginning to infer other people's desires. In the study, they actually presented they presented an adult with two different objects. The adult first looked very displeased and grimaced when one object was presented, and then when the other object was presented, was smiling and looked happy. They asked the 18-month-old typically developing children to give her the one she wants, or that she would want. And these children gave her the one that she smiled in the presence of. So the conclusion was, wow, at 18 months of age, typically developing children are making these inferences. So this lesson deals with those kind of concepts. It also teaches the children even more advanced things like using and understanding disguised demands, for example, and many others. Now, let's put that aside for a minute and talk about the emotions lesson. Basic emotions would involve, let's say, teaching a child to identify how another person is feeling based on facial expressions. The way all these lessons work with each other, though, is they begin to combine their concepts. So a lot of times the users will be working on earlier skills within a lesson, and then they'll put that down and then go to another lesson and work on an early skill, and then they'll begin to combine the two and kind of pick them both back up. So for example, desire-based emotions. In this area, the children are taught that when someone's desire is met or unmet will affect how they feel. So for example, if your friend is going to come over for a play date and they really like pink, and you're not going to let them have the pink marker, but you're going to make them use the blue one, how will they feel? So they begin to make a prediction about someone's emotions, and then they can decide, okay, given that, how should we interact right now when our friend comes over for this play date? Along the same lines, the beliefs lesson teaches children to identify whether someone's holding a true or a false belief. So for example, I might believe that my bicycle's in the garage, and I think that because that's usually where I keep it. But if someone moved it and it's somewhere else, when I walk out to get my bicycle and find that my belief is actually false, I'm going to feel pretty upset and panicky. And so again, these kind of things are used to help kids learn to identify what are other people believing that's either true or not, and how is that going to make them feel if they do hold on to that false belief, and so forth. Some of the ways some of the other lessons build on each other. The senses lesson teaches the children to identify their own senses. This then leads nicely into the sensory perspective taking lesson, where they begin to identify another person's sensory perspective. So for example, what can another person see? What can another person hear? And so forth. Those things are pretty basic concepts, but then they lead very also nicely into the knowing lesson. In this lesson, children are beginning to identify whether another person holds certain knowledge or not. So in order for them to decide if someone knows something or not, they're going to usually refer to their sensory perspective. So they might say something like, let's say I asked a child, does your mother know that she just missed a phone call? The child might say something like, she doesn't because she didn't hear her phone ringing. So you notice how they refer to the mother's senses and their perspective as to whether or not they heard the phone call. And why does any of this matter? Well, because then once children can identify whether someone knows something or not, this is going to help them with conversational skills and other social skills. So for example, we can teach them rules. Like when you're in a conversation with someone, you don't have, or it's not necessary to tell them something they already know. So if you spent the day together yesterday, there's no use in telling stories about what you did yesterday to this friend because she was there and she saw and heard all the same things you did. Or if you're talking to your 3-year-old sister, she doesn't know anything yet about train stations and time schedules, so there's no point in talking to her about that topic. The thinking lesson. This one's interesting. It basically begins by teaching the children that thoughts are not tangible and you can't see them or touch them, and they vary for different people. It also teaches the idea that it's okay to have different opinions and think different things. And it also becomes very advanced at some point where it teaches children that sometimes what someone is saying and doing doesn't match what they're actually thinking and feeling. And that's a pretty difficult concept for them to get, but it's a big aha moment as well. So a lot of cartoons and things are used to teach these kind of concepts. So like one example cartoon within the skills curriculum is of a little boy and a little girl who are in a room together, and there's also a spider in the room. The boy is feeling deathly afraid of spiders, and so he's feeling scared, and he's thinking he'd like to run out of the room screaming, but instead he wants to look cool in front of this little girl because he likes her, so he says, wow, look at that cool spider. So at this point now we're starting to teach the children to look at more subtle social cues like tone of voice, facial expressions, and body language, for example. And all of that is also extremely relevant when teaching a child to detect sarcasm, which is another area here. We actually just published a study maybe 2 months ago or something in RASD on teaching children to detect sarcasm and how to respond appropriately. And basically they were taught that sarcasm is we gave them a rule that it's when someone says the opposite of what they actually mean. And then we gave them things to look for. So, for example, if I'm playing basketball and someone tells me, nice, wow, nice shot, when I go up and it's an air ball, I can detect that they're being sarcastic because I look at the context of the situation. The ball wasn't even near the basket. Their tone of voice was pretty insincere. Their facial expression was a smirk. And given all of those variables combined, I know that they're being sarcastic. And then we'll also teach them, here's how you respond to someone who's being sarcastic. Another lesson that I'll mention to you is deception. In this lesson, the children are taught to identify when they're being deceived. We did publish another study, this was about a month ago, on teaching children with autism to identify when others were lying to them. Essentially, bullies were lying to them at school and giving them rules like, you're not allowed to play with this toy because it's only for girls, or you can only play with it if you're 6 years old, or something like that. And the children with autism were being bullied, and they believed it. So in this study, they were taught to identify that, and none of this was rote memorization of certain exemplars or targets. All of the work that we do involves teaching a generalized operant repertoire. So we keep teaching until we get generalization to novel targets and exemplars, and generalization across usually settings or with a peer and those kind of things. But also this lesson is going to teach them to use deception in adaptive ways. So keeping a secret, keeping a surprise. If they're telling a joke, they sometimes have to deceive before they give away the punchline of the joke. And they're going to need to engage in white lies in their life as well. And that's another study that we're currently conducting right now. So this would be like if you give the child a gift that they don't like, or if you got a new hairstyle or something and they don't like it, and you ask them, what do you think? Do you like it? They would just kind of say like, yeah, it's nice, thank you, as opposed to, you know, it's really ugly and stupid and I hate it, which is a lot of times what they do. They end up being too honest. So these are just some of those areas here. I don't have time to obviously go into all of them, but you get an idea of how some of the things they go over. This last one, social skills, I won't actually spend the time to go over all the lessons with you, but I'm going to let you see the different domains and the names of the lessons within them. So we have nonvocal social behavior, which includes a lot of things here that I'm sure look familiar. We also have social language, so a lot of this is conversation skills, and other things like prosody and general knowledge, pop cultural kind of things. There's social interaction, lots of different things to work on here. One that I'll just mention is levels of friendship. In this lesson, we actually teach the children to categorize people, going from like a stranger all the way up to a best friend or a family member. And then we teach them the relationship-appropriate behavior that matches each of those categories. There's a few different things here for teaching self-esteem type issues or skills, as well as social context. So responding to social cues could be something more of an environmental cue, like someone left the refrigerator door open and I just walked past it. Do I do that, or do I close it? Or a more social or behavioral kind of social cue would be something like I'm getting on an elevator and or I'm standing on an elevator and someone else is trying to get on. I need to move to the side. Or I see someone walking towards the door carrying a pile of books. I could help them by opening the door instead of doing nothing. Social rules. Many things here, and if the child can be taught to follow rules and to do what they say they're going to do, as in say-do correspondence, this is really helpful for teaching many other types of social skills. Group-related skills, which are really good for classroom, and then last is absurdities. So now I'm going to show a demo of the skills website and how it works. Actually, let's go to this one. That's already got my username in there. So the skills website is not a software you have to download to your computer. You just go to a URL address and you put in a username and a password and you log in. Once you're in the system, you will find the 4 steps that I've mentioned in my presentation across the top of the screen. Whatever step you're on is going to be in red. So we're on the Choose Child section. Now when you're in here, you will see all the children that you've ever entered in. So if you are a supervisor of a child or a teacher and you are responsible for those children, you enter them in. You actually enter them in by clicking this button that says Add New Child, and you answer a few drop-down menu type questions. Then you see all the kids you entered. Now there's also going to be other people entering in kids who might be a part of your account. Let's say you work for an organization or a school district and you all have one skills account that you're using. Each one of you enters in your own children. You only see your children and you don't see each other's children unless someone shares that child with you. So as a primary teacher or supervisor, I can enter in a child, and then I might have other people that are co-supervising or that are on the team, like an OT or an SLP, let's say, that I want to be able to see that child. So I share the child with them. So what will happen is they'll see those children listed as shared children. If you click on a child's name, it takes you to their dashboard. In the dashboard, you get to see this progress snapshot. So there's 3 tabs here. This first tab, Assessment, shows the 8 curricular areas and how much of the assessment has been completed in terms of a percentage versus what is left to still be done. If you click the In Treatment tab, you see how many items are in treatment for each of these 8 areas. And I'm going to explain what these little things stand for at some point later in the presentation. And then lastly is Mastery. So this shows me how much has been mastered in the 8 areas. Now I'm going to move to step 2, which is to do the assessment. So it will default to this tab that says List All Skills by Lesson and Curriculum, and then you have a drop-down menu to choose which area you'd like to assess. So let's say you want to assess social skills. You will then get a list of things to begin assessing. Everything that you're provided is based on the child's chronological age. So if you put, when you added the child in, if you put their birthday in and it suggests they're a 5-year-old child, you will get an assessment that goes from infant skills up to 5 years of age. The goal here is to get the child caught up to their typically developing same age peers. So we're trying to figure out everything that this child needs to learn to be caught up. Now when the child has a birthday, let's say, and now turns 6, then you will have more additional things to answer in the assessment. So every year when the child gets older, there's more things. For each one of the items that needs to be assessed, you can read information about it by clicking this information icon, or you can watch a video by clicking this video icon. After having done both of those two things, you know right away the child doesn't have any skills in this area, you can go ahead and click here and it will answer all the questions that are in the assessment no, without you reading them. However, if you're not sure and you're wanting to check to see if the child has a skill or not, you would click Start Assessment. At this point, you have options of how you're going to answer your assessment. You get yes, no questions, and there are concrete examples you can open up for each of these as well. And you can either say yes, so I would say yes if the child has a skill and you never care to work on it again, because the way that the system works is that anything you answer is no, you will get access to any lessons that are associated with that question. But if you answer yes, you do not get access to the lessons. So a lot of people have trouble with deciding should I answer yes or no because maybe the child can do it under certain conditions or with certain people. I will ask you to ask yourself, do I want to make this better than it already is, or is it as good as it's ever going to get? If it's something I want to work on more and improve upon, I need to answer no so that I can get access to the lesson to work on it. Now, if you're working on this assessment and you don't really know if the child can do it or not and you need to test them, you can mark this as a probe item because maybe you can't test them right now. Then what's happening is after you fill all these out, let's say, something like this, then you can print this and you can remember which ones you have to probe. You go test the child, you come back later, and then you change your answer from either probe to yes or no, let's say. We do not dictate how the assessment needs to be filled out. We're not going to say it's all direct observation or it's all verbal report or a combination. It is whatever works for the user. So if someone does not have the capability of doing any direct observation, then one thing they can do is they can answer yes to everything they're very certain the child can do, and they can answer no to anything they're uncertain about, because when you get into step 3, you actually have the ability to change your answer. So if you are looking at an activity available to you in step 3 and you realize the child can do it already, you can mark it as a known skill. And basically that ends up changing the associated assessment question and answer from a no to a yes. We built that in because we knew some people are just not going to be capable of testing all of these items. Now this tab, Search Skill by Keyword or Topic, is also for other people who have an even more difficult time doing assessment. They don't even have time to do it at all. So school districts, for example, they have IEPs in place, and they know already what the goals are of what they need to teach, and they might have other assessments that they're mandated to use. So they're now thinking, I don't want to do another assessment, I just want to get the stuff I need. If that's the case, they can come here and type in a keyword like inference, let's say, and it will pop up everything in our curriculum that we offer. Or if you're like a behavior analyst who is into the verbal behavior approach and you want to look up things by verbal operant types, you can type in MAND and you can get things. So basically what you'll notice is for each of these things, you can either click this plus, which would add all the activities for that area into the child's treatment plan. So there's 5 activities. Or there's also an option of answering assessment questions first to determine which of the 5 are even needed, and that would be to click here. So now we're going to go to step 3. In step 3, imagine this is like a supermarket of activities. Everything in here is stuff that has been identified as needed for the child to learn based on the answers to the assessment questions. So you get to choose what you want to teach. So first you go and pick a curriculum, then you go and you pick a lesson. So let's say I want to teach something from the joint attention lesson, and then I want to read the purpose of that lesson, perhaps. I can do that. And then I can see there's 2 sections to this lesson. The first section will teach the child to respond to joint attention bids, and the second section will teach them to initiate joint attention bids. There's various activities listed under each of these sections. We'll not be able to see the full activity text here because to make it aesthetically pleasing, we couldn't put it all in. So it's important to open up this information icon here to get more information. So for example, you'll notice that this activity has a setup as well that you were unable to see before. The activity information will also give you the ages of development. Sometimes this is going to literally go on for a few years. So you might see like from 1 to 2 years old, it looks like this. From 2 to 3 years old, it looks like that. And then it'll show like a progression so that whatever age child you're working with, you can tailor it. This also provides IEP goals and benchmarks for every single activity. There's 4,000 activities in the skills program, and every one of them has an IP goal and benchmark that can be used and customized, modified, or whatever needs to be done to make it individualized. There's always, after this activity, some examples that are very concrete. Sometimes the activities themselves sound pretty clinical, but the examples are not. So teachers find that that's extremely helpful. And then also we provide these prerequisites here, which are the names of other lessons that should be taken a look at perhaps before targeting the current item. It doesn't mean every single activity in these lessons needs to be mastered, though. It just means there may be some things relevant in there that should be looked at first. This is actually considered one of our tools to help people decide what to put in the child's treatment plan. We actually have 5 of these tools, and the reason why we came up with this is because the skills program will not dictate to you exactly what to introduce to the child in their plan. So it's not going to say, here's the 15 or 20 things we think that you should put in the child's logbook. The reason for that is because you obviously have a lot of other things involved with designing a curriculum for a child. Things like how many hours a week are they getting, for how long, do we have them for a few months or a year or more, what does the parents want, what's going to be helpful for school setting, what's going to actually be relevant to their real life, or what do they never encounter and doesn't even matter to them, and resources and all sorts of other things. So Skills is not capable yet of, and I don't know if it ever will be, of identifying exactly which ones to put in the child's plan, but it provides you with, let's say, it's like an encyclopedia or a massive index of every single thing typically developing children learn. So we did our research across all areas of human functioning and found what do children learn across all of these areas in typical development from the moment they're born up to adolescent age. And we put it all together in this huge index, and then that's how we began building the skills curriculum. So now you're looking at step 3, and this is basically everything this child needs to get caught up. So we have 5 tools that help people decide which of those items to maybe prioritize, and that first one there was these prerequisites that were in the information icon. The second tool is that every lesson's in a level, and you'll notice that easier kind of concepts are in level 1, and then they just get more and more difficult with the levels. We have 12 levels in our program. You might notice that there's nothing being offered right now in level 6, 7, 9, 11, or 12. That could be for one of 3 possible reasons. Either A, the assessment questions that were associated with it were answered as yes, so the child doesn't need it, so it's not being offered. B, it's above the child's chronological age, so it's age inappropriate, but it'll be offered later when the child gets older. Or C, the user hasn't actually answered any assessment questions yet, and they need to go back first and finish answering some assessment questions before they can choose which activities are needed. The second tool, or the third tool, is these ages. So this little box here that says 0 tells me this is a 0 to 12-month-old skill. So all of the ages are in here by 1-year bins, and it's all based on emerging age. The 1 means a 1 to 2-year-old skill. Fourth tool is that all of these things have been numbered. This is activity 3, this is activity 4. The users do not need to follow our order because this is not considered a cookbook approach. As I said, kids have different circumstances, different things that will be relevant to them, and so on and so forth. So if users do not want to follow the order, that's fine. It's just there to be helpful. The fifth tool is that all of these items have been categorized as a certain kind of skill. So this FN stands for a fundamental skill, whereas you can see like down here, this is a building block skill. And we actually have a third kind called an expansion skill. The idea is that a fundamental would be like a milestone or a legitimate skill that children actually engage in daily life. A building block would be more like a successive approximation toward a fundamental, and it's not really the legitimate actual skill that matters. And an expansion skill would go above and beyond a fundamental and be like an enrichment activity that would be great for kids that we expect best outcomes with. So we always tell people to look at the profile of the learner that they're dealing with. If they have one of those kind of children who flies through the curriculum, then they may never need building blocks because they're not actually the legitimate real skill that matters. They're just the little successive approximations or stepping stones, and they can hide those. So building blocks can be hidden either by checking this box, or you can hide individual skills too. With that kind of a learner, fundamentals and expansions might be really important. Now with an opposite kind of a learner who's more lower functioning and doesn't learn very quickly, they probably will rely on building blocks, and fundamentals will be important, but maybe expansions will not necessarily be a goal for that child. Now let's say you see this activity and you read it to yourself and you say, oh, the child can already do this. This is where you can mark it as a known skill when I was explaining earlier. It will change the associated assessment questions answers from a no to a yes. So this is a way we have built in as a second option to ensure better accuracy with that. And let's say that you actually read one of these and you want to put it in the child's treatment plan, then you just click Add. And you come to the bottom and you click Continue, and now that will be in the child's treatment plan. But before I move on, I want to also show you that we have videos in here as well for the various items. Of the 4,000 activities, we still need to film about 1,100 of our videos, so we're not there yet, but we're adding videos all the time. The videos do not show how to prompt or fade prompts or what to do for error correction procedures. They only show the teacher providing instructions and materials and a child engaging in a desired correct response. The point of that is because when you're reading the text here, if there's any confusion as to what it's supposed to look like, then that's the point of the video. We know that in our field, lots of people use different kinds of teaching techniques. So some people like to use pivotal response training, some people like discrete trial, some people like natural environment training, and so on and so forth. So that's the reason why we don't provide all of that in the videos. Now let's say we added this. We'll go to step 4 now. This is where you would get that item that you added. When you're here, you have ways of sorting, so you can show everything or you can pick a curriculum. And then you also have ways of filtering within that curriculum, so you can see what's in progress. Or when I first add something like I did just now in step 3, it'll be considered pending until I formally introduce it. I'm going to go to something in progress right now, though. So when you first get into an activity, this is the activity guide, and you can see, this is from the play curriculum, and then within the play curriculum, there's many lessons, and this is one of those lessons. It's called Functional Pretend Play. And then within each lesson, there's many sections, and this is one section of that Functional Pretend Play lesson called Imitation. And then within each of these, there's also activities, so this is Activity 1. You can see the details of this activity, like the ages of emergence, the emergence of ages, the IEP goal, the activity itself, some concrete examples. Teaching points are like troubleshooting and helpful hints, ideas for obtaining generalization. The user can also click this edit link, and when they do that, it'll let them go in and make edits to the lesson so they can customize it for the child. So for example, if you'll notice in the skills program that all of the response requirements of the child are, we chose to write it in a way that would be the typical response that you would expect in a typically developing child. So that means there's a lot of speech and vocal responses. Now, if you're working with a non-vocal child, that doesn't mean they can't learn the concept. It just means you've got to change their response requirements. So that's where you might want to edit this, for example. So if they're going to use some other device or something, that would go there. There's also custom settings, and these custom settings are going to let you choose to tell the staff exactly other kind of things you want them to do while teaching. This is optional. But you could say to your staff, I want you to use discrete trial teaching or natural environment training or whatever. You could then tell them what prompting hierarchy you want them to use, and you can even choose your prompts. So you can either create your own custom ones or you can choose ones that are in here already. So you might do something like this. You could also put it, if you want a constant time delay, so say I want a 5-second delay before you even implement a prompt, let's say. And then you would save these settings, and at that point you can print this whole thing out by coming up here and generate a lesson activity to put into the child's treatment logbook. Sorry, my phone is ringing. 1 second here. I'm just letting it go to voicemail. Okay. So when you're in an activity, you'll notice, like in this activity, the child is supposed to imitate a functional pretend play action, which is listed here. But the user might say, well, I'd love to see a list of what those possible actions would be. We have that here under exemplars. And you can see, for example, it might teach the child to eat a pretend food item, which has been mastered already. And then there's other items, too, that have been introduced. And then these ones need to be introduced or can be. They don't have to be. You ignore them if you don't want them. Perhaps this one here The child already can do that, so we come here to this action icon and we mark it as a known skill, either in baseline, or let's say because this is an imitation item, I've taught 5 imitation items and now they're generalizing other items on the list, so I mark it as generalized. If a mastered item regresses, you can mark it as a regressed or a lost skill. And once something introduced is mastered, you can master it. Or if you're having problems with it and you need to put it on hold, that's an option as well. And just all this does when you're updating all this is it goes into the database and it updates all the progress charts. Now let's say you've taught all the targets or exemplars you care to teach for this particular activity. So now you go to the status tab, and this is the status of the entire activity. So now we're done teaching the child to imitate functional pretend play actions, so we will master this. There are other options here too, but it just depends on what phase you're in. So right now, because I've already introduced it, I can only master it or put it on hold. Or if I make a mistake at any point, I can also reset my activity status. This again goes in and feeds data into the database for the progress charts. The last handout I'm going to show you is this Handouts tab. These are PDFs that you can print out, and they will vary depending on the activity. So right now I'm getting an idea checklist, but if this was an academic lesson, I would get probably about 15 worksheets to compose a workbook for the child's practice skills. If this was toilet training, I'd have a special tracking form for that. If this was a conversation lesson, I would have visual aids to help the child learn the concepts, so like a conversation topic tower or something like that. Now I'm going to go back to the child's dashboard. To do that, you click their name, which is next to this thumbtack, and I'm going to show you the progress chart. This first progress chart is an overall chart. So along the X are the curricular areas, and along the Y is a percentage, and for each of them there is A for assessment and T for treatment. So if a user actually takes the time to answer the entire assessment for a given curriculum, then the bar will reach 100% like you're seeing here. And then it will break it into red in terms of what the child doesn't know how to do yet and needs to learn, versus in green what they do know. And then on the T for treatment side, everything they know goes onto the bottom, and then we have to start to fill in this gap. If we can get this bar to reach 100% here, we have a child caught up to their typically developing same age peers. Now the mastered stuff comes in light green, and then anything marked as generalized comes in blue. If you're familiar with the VB map or the ABLES and you like to see the language curriculum subdivided by verbal operant type, we have a special chart for that. So each of the verbal behavior types is along the x-axis, and the user is able to see how did the child do during assessment and how did they do during treatment. Our language curriculum is actually, the way that it's organized is first the lesson names are things like attributes, actions, and those kind of things, but then within each of those lessons, the different section names are things like MANS, TACS, and interverbal. So we're ensuring that we're teaching all functional uses of every language concept. This tab, Lesson Details, will actually show you how is the child doing in each of their lessons within a curriculum. So I could go, let's say, to the Executive Functions curriculum, and these are a whole list of lessons. And I can either look at the assessment details or the mastery details. Under assessment details, I see in green, what did the child know, versus in red, what did they not know. If I click mastery details, it's the same lessons, but now I'm seeing in the dark green what they knew in baseline, in the light green what's been mastered, and then here's what's left to be learned. Our next tab, Clinical Timeline, is a line graph. And there is a lot of data on the graph, but you can take this check mark off this box so that you're not showing all the data at once, and this allows you to only look at what you want to look at. We will put in activity mastery, so when I mark off that an activity has been mastered, it will go in here and graph it automatically as a cumulative number of activities being mastered. So as long as the child's learning something new every day, then it's going to bump up by however many new things they learn. So it will always be moving in an upward slope as long as the child is learning. If there's any plateaus, like here where it's just flat, I can actually look at that area by highlighting the graph and zooming into it. So I've just zoomed into my plateau. And I see the child didn't really learn anything for about a week. If I hover over that shaded kind of purple-gray background area, it says there wasn't any school for that week. Well, this child received all ABA during school hours, so now I kind of understand why they didn't learn anything for a week. So the point of this graph is for users to be able to input life events like the child getting sick or starting a medication or something that might affect the child's learning line. Now, to add those kind of events, you just click this Add New Data button and you get drop-down menus. We have different kind of events, like this one that has a start date and an end date. We would consider a duration event. It's kind of like phase change lines. Things like there being no school or getting sick. Whereas there's other kind of events that we call discrete events. I'm going to put them back on the graph, like checking the box. These are more like arrows on a graph. They do not have values, so they're always on the 0 line. But like, for instance, I'm going to bring back tantrums. There were hardly any tantrums going on before there was no school. Then they came back from the vacation and their tantrums were really high. There were 15 tantrums on January 16th as well as on January 17th. Well, it so happens if you look down at the orange at the bottom, we also introduced a new behavior intervention plan on that day for the tantrum, at which point later the tantrums began to decrease. Now, obviously, this is a hypothetical graph, but I'm just showing how this graph can be used to input any sort of life events, whether they're duration events or discrete events. Anything that you've ever added will be listed below here, and you have the ability to edit and delete them if you make mistakes. The next thing I'm going to show you is the Behavior Intervention Plan Builder. This is basically a tool for writing behavior intervention plans for challenging behavior. It assumes that you've already done a functional behavioral assessment, though, and that you know the function or the reason why the child's engaging in the challenging behavior. So at the point that the FBA is complete, the user can use this tool to start to write the behavior intervention plan. So the first step is they pick a behavior category like aggression, or they can also choose other if they don't see what they want. They then choose specific behaviors, and they write up an operational definition. Then they say how the person who's implementing the BIP is going to collect data on the behavior, so let's say a frequency, and then they also come up with an IEP goal for this behavior. And they put what function it was during the FBA. So if it was escape maintained, they would choose escape. They then get these paragraphs of questions and asking, do you want to include this in the treatment plan? So when I say yes, that I want to include antecedents for escape in my treatment plan, it starts asking me and giving me options about different kinds of antecedents. So one of them being demand fading, let's say. Another being task modification, and so on and so forth. So you would answer yes or no if you want these in the plan. The users will not need to read these paragraphs if they already know behavior analysis. They're here for laymen to explain what this means and to kind of give advice, and also to lead people to choose least intrusive interventions first as well. So if the behavior is maintained by more than one function, you can click here and choose a second function. If not, you create the BIP. This is the BIP that it creates. So it actually will provide instructions to people on what to do for that challenging behavior. Now, there are fill-in-the-blanks that you need to implement. So for task modification, it says that we're going to be modifying the way tasks are presented to decrease motivation to escape them, blah, 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 blah. And then it says specific task modifications to implement are, and then you're supposed to write in which ones you want the staff to implement. Now, of course, if you don't like how things are worded, you can just type right over the top of it and put it in your own words. You can also remove a text box if you decide you don't want that item anymore, and you can also add a new text box if you want to add more information or ideas that were not covered in the BIP builder. Keep in mind that when this was created, it was based off evidence-based procedures that we know to work for certain functions of behavior, and it also was provided in a way to try to guide people to use least intrusive interventions first. We also provide lots of behavior data sheets and forms here, like ABC forms and those kind of things. To view these are all the ones you've ever created, and you can sort based on all kinds of things, but you can also see a very quick view of what's in a plan, or you can open it up and you can edit it, and you can always save it as a new report or save over the top. So that's a way to gain the access back to the plans and make changes. The rest of these I won't show you, but I'll just describe. So skills history is a place where you can go in and see every question you've ever answered in the assessment and how you answered it, whether you put yes or no, and you can even change your answers there if you made a mistake. You can also see every activity and all of the status updates. So when it was introduced, put on hold, mastered, or any of those things. Supervisor and case manager notes is a place where we communicate with insurance case managers. So insurance people can log in as well, and they will ask questions, or it's a place where dialogue can happen back and forth between the supervisor and the case manager from insurance. Provider notes is that same concept, but now we don't include the insurance people here. This is just the other people that are on the child's team. And then treatment hours is where you would go in and put how many hours did the child get this week. And so every week you input how many they got. That's important because that information is relevant for the reports that the skills program can provide and the analytics. We also provide you with all of our data sheets and forms. You can use any of these if you want. This is because we're still doing paper-pencil data collection within our teaching sessions. At the moment, we have programmers and tech people dealing with our clinicians to create a data collection software for within teaching sessions so that we can get trial-by-trial data. However, I do not know at this point when that will be available. So right now, the skill system allows you simply to mark when things are being introduced and being mastered at this point. The other thing Skills offers is a support center. The support center provides lots of things like glossary, frequently asked questions, and all of these navigational tutorials and clinical videos, as well as our email and our phone numbers. We also provide live chatting at any time, 9 to 5 Pacific Standard Time. So if you click here, you can engage with one of our staff in a live chat to ask any questions that you have. And then now I just want to show you quickly how you would access your trial. So, and get started in terms of setting it up, because the trial that you're getting is considered an organizational account, which means that you can create usernames and passwords for anyone else that you would like to also participate in the trial. So you would first come to your name when you log in and click on My Account. You will update. By the way, there's no need to take notes on this or anything because we have a document that provides a step-by-step instruction on what to do when you first start your account. You'll update your personal information, and then you'll change your password so that we don't have access to your account, and you'll come up with a security question and answer and click Update. The next step is to come back to your name and click on Admin Page. As the administrator of this organizational account, you get to create usernames and passwords for other people, so you decide what kind of access you want them to have. If you make them an administrator, then they too will be able to create usernames and passwords for people. If you don't want that and you just want them to have full access, you can offer them full access. You'll put in their name and also create a username and a password for them and then add them as a member. At that point, you'll email them and you'll be able to copy and paste straight out of the document that we send that explains to them what to do now to use the skills program. The next thing you can do as an administrator is manage all of your users. So this, let's say, is all of the staff that are in your organization that you've created usernames and passwords for. If you click on one of their names, you can do things like delete them or change their password. Sometimes they forget what their password is and they can't get a hold of us here quickly enough because of time differences and things like that. So you could come in and reset their password for them. You can also check up on them to see what kids they've entered into the system. This person hasn't entered any. They only have 6 kids being shared with them. But you can see have they done any assessment or treatment? Has anything been mastered? So it's a quick way to also kind of look user by user, what are they accomplishing in the skills program. Manage child. Again, these are your staff that you've given usernames and passwords to. You click a name. These are the 6 kids that are being shared right now with Alan. If I wanted Alan to also be able to see Elijah, I click Elijah, then plus. Now when Alan logs into his skills account, he will be able to see Elijah as a shared child. If Alex is no longer going to be his responsibility or he's not going to be involved at all in the care and treatment of Alex, I can click minus. And the next time that Alan logs into his skills account, he will no longer be able to see Alex. I can also change who the primary supervisor is for Alex. So if I do that, then it's no longer considered a shared child. It's considered one of their primaries. And I can delete this child too if at some point I want to do that. I can see again how much progress has been made with the child. If I choose access types, these are the 4 types that we have with the various permissions. So like right now, the parental permission is set for them to be able to view and do certain things, but not to be able to modify the program. If you want to make changes to that, maybe you want your parents to be able to do certain things that they're not being able to do now, you can, and you would just make changes and then submit it, and from now on, that'll be the default for parental access. You can also create your own positions. So if you have certain position types in your organization, you can do that, and you can create what their permissions are for using the skills program. The last one is login history. And this is all of the people you've made your usernames and passwords for. You can see kind of what access type they have, when they last logged in, when their account was created, and how many children they've entered into the program. So the only other thing I wanted to discuss, and then I can take some questions, is the fact that Skills provides reports. So we don't have buttons yet for users to click on to generate their own report. We are creating that capability, but right now what happens is that if they need a report, they just ask and we can email it to them. And it takes the data from the system and it generates progress reports with graphs and things like that. A lot of these reports have already been pre-approved by various insurance companies as well. We also have created our own indirect assessment for challenge behavior that can be used towards determining the function of that behavior, which in the future will be put onto the skills program. As I said earlier, we are working as well on electronic data collection for within session. And then last, I like to tell people we provide training. We can go out in person and train people how to use skills. We can do advanced versions or intro versions. It kind of depends on what the needs are of the organization. And if people can't do in person, but they still want to learn more about principles and procedures of ABA, we are partnered also with the Institute for Behavioral Training. And this organization provides, for example, e-learning training to various different kinds. So educators, for example, these are all the different modules that they offer. I don't know, I think there's like 60 or something here, but all of this is to train teachers how to do ABA procedures and techniques, which is completely different from